I arrived at the reservoir just before dusk, when the light thins and sound begins to travel farther than it should. The road ended in a narrow pull-off above the waterline, marked only by a weathered sign warning of sudden drops and unstable ground. I shut off the engine and listened. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wet stone. Across the water, a bell tower stood alone, its lower half swallowed by the reservoir, its upper windows empty, dark. This place had a name once. Now it existed between maps, remembered only by locals and a handful of old photographs. I had asked for permission to be here. The answer came with conditions. Do not cross the buoy line. Do not dive, and do not take anything from the shore. I came alone only in the sense that no one stood beside me. Reconnaissance had been done weeks earlier, and the rules, those 4 rules, were the only reason I felt safe enough to step closer. They say the bells ring on still nights, not loudly, not for long. A low, submerged tolling that seems to come from everywhere at once. I did not come to prove it. I came to understand why people still swear they hear them. The village beneath this water was evacuated decades ago, its fate decided by engineers and drought charts. A dam was built upstream. The valley filled slowly, methodically. Churches were dismantled where possible. Graves were moved. Homes were burned or flattened to prevent collapse. But one thing remained: the church tower. Records show it was deemed too costly to remove. When the water rose, it stood and waited. In winter, when the reservoir freezes, the tower looks closer than it is, a stone finger pointing upward through ice. In summer, when drought pulls the shoreline back, the tower seems to lean, as if listening. I followed the gravel path to the edge. The water was unnaturally calm. No wind, no insects. I took photographs, only photographs, and noted the acoustics. Sound carries differently over water, especially here, where the basin acts like a bowl. Locals told me that on nights like this, the bells come back. They say it happens when the reservoir drops below a certain level, exposing the old foundations. They say pressure changes, currents shifting through submerged rooms, air pockets collapsing in stairwells. Engineers have explanations. None of them fully account for the timing. I checked my notes. This reservoir was completed in the mid-20th century, part of a regional hydroelectric project. The drowned village dates back centuries. Parish records mention bells cast in the 1700s, retuned after a fire, rung daily until the evacuation order arrived. On the last Sunday, witnesses wrote that the bells were rung longer than usual. The water reached the nave months later. The bells were never retrieved. As darkness settled, I began to hear the reservoir breathe. Not waves, something deeper. A pressure sound, like a distant door opening and closing underwater. I reminded myself of the rules. Never go alone meant never rely on impulse. Conduct reconnaissance meant know the myths and the physics. Ask for permission meant respect what people still consider sacred. Take nothing but photos meant leave the past where it is. A fisherman approached from the opposite bank, his lantern bobbing. We did not speak at first. When he finally did, he asked if I was listening for the bells. I nodded. He told me he had heard them twice in his life. Both times during drought years, both times after midnight. He said the sound did not travel across the surface. It rose straight up from the water beneath the tower. It's not a ring, he said. It's a call. He left before I could ask more. I stayed. The temperature dropped. The tower's shadow stretched across the reservoir like a seam. At exactly the moment the last light disappeared behind the ridge, a sound reached me. Not metallic, not clear, but rhythmic. 3 low pulses, spaced evenly apart. I held my breath. It came again, softer this time, as if muffled by depth. I recorded the audio, noting the time and conditions. Wind, none. Boat traffic, none. The sound did not repeat a third time. There are documented cases like this elsewhere. In Germany's Edersee, when water levels fall, church foundations reappear, and residents report echoes that resemble bells when currents pass through stone arches. In Spain's Valdecañas Reservoir, a submerged Roman church emerges during droughts, and locals describe low tones at night, attributed to shifting silt and trapped air. These explanations are plausible. They are also incomplete. None explain why the sounds, when recorded, show a regular interval consistent with human ringing patterns rather than random collapse. I did not enter the water. I did not cross the line. I packed up and began the walk back as fog formed low over the surface, wrapping the tower's base until it looked as if it were floating. Behind me, something moved beneath the water, slow, deliberate, leaving no wake. I stopped, counted my steps, and kept going. Back at the car, I reviewed the audio. The pulses were there, clearer than I expected. As I locked the door, another sound reached me, closer now, unmistakably bell-like, a single toll that seemed to come from directly below the tower. But that still wasn't the strangest part. I did not return the next night. That was deliberate. Patterns matter more than persistence, and whatever had produced those sounds would not reveal itself through impatience. Instead, I spent the following day tracing records, hydrological reports, parish archives, dam construction logs, and first-hand accounts collected long before the reservoir became a destination for photographers. The drowned village had been called by different names across centuries, but the church remained constant in every map. A stone structure built on slightly higher ground, its bell tower reinforced after an earthquake in the late 1800s. That reinforcement may have saved it. It may also be why it still stands, partially submerged, long after everything else was erased. By evening I was back, this time positioned farther down the shore, closer to where the old main road would have descended into the village. The waterline had retreated enough to expose fragments, squared stones, a collapsed wall, the outline of what might once have been a doorway. I photographed each marker and logged their positions. This was reconnaissance, not exploration. I stayed above the soft silt and avoided shadows that suggested sudden drop-offs. People drown here every few years, usually after ignoring warnings, usually alone. The air carried a faint smell of rot and algae layered over something older, damp wood perhaps, or disturbed earth. Sound behaved strangely again. A cough echoed too long. My footsteps felt delayed, as if the ground itself was listening before responding. As night fell, the reservoir reflected the tower perfectly, creating the illusion of a second structure reaching downward into the water. It was difficult not to stare at that reflection, to imagine depth continuing far beyond what the charts showed. I set up recording equipment at 3 points along the shore to triangulate any sound. If bells rang again, I wanted directionality. I wanted proof. At 22:17, a low vibration registered on all 3 devices, not a clear tone, more like resonance traveling through water and stone. At 22:19, a second vibration followed, slightly higher in frequency. At 22:22, nothing. The intervals were consistent with what I had recorded the previous night. There is a theory among acoustic engineers that submerged hollow structures can behave like wind instruments when currents pass through them, producing tones that appear deliberate. The church beneath this reservoir has vaulted ceilings, stairwells, and narrow window openings. It is possible that water moving through these spaces produces something bell-like. Possible, but again, incomplete. Currents here are weak. Flow rates at this depth should not sustain rhythmic resonance. I moved closer to the exposed ruins, stopping where the ground hardened into old stonework. That was as far as I would go. The rule, never go alone, extends beyond physical presence. It is about not isolating yourself from reason. I repeated the facts out loud, quietly, grounding myself in dates and data. Evacuation orders issued, population relocated, bells last rung on record during final mass. Water level rose to present height within 18 months. No documented recovery attempts. A sound reached me then, unmistakable and close. Not from the tower this time, but from beneath the water near the ruins at my feet. It was not a bell. It was the sound of metal under tension, like a cable shifting, or a chain pulled slowly through mud. I stepped back immediately. The water rippled outward in a tight circle, then went still. Locals describe something they call the pull, an urge to step closer, to listen harder, to confirm what they think they heard. Several near drownings over the years involved people wading in without realizing how steep the drop became just beyond the old road. Survivors report confusion, disorientation, and the certainty that something was calling them by name. Medical explanations cite cold shock, panic, auditory hallucinations. The survivors insist otherwise. I checked the historical accounts again that night. One detail stood out. During the evacuation, the bells were reportedly silenced earlier than planned. Parish notes mention complaints, people claiming the bells rang at night without being pulled, that livestock refused to cross the square after dusk, that echoes lingered even after ringing stopped. A final entry, dated weeks before the water arrived, states simply, "The tower will remain." Close to midnight, fog returned, thicker this time, rolling in low bands across the reservoir. Visibility dropped to a few meters. The tower's upper windows disappeared entirely. Then, from within the fog, the sound returned, clearer than before. A single bell toll, followed by another, then another, 3 in total, each one deeper, slower, as if measured. All 3 recording devices captured it. The frequencies aligned. The spacing was exact. I did not move. I did not speak. When the fog lifted minutes later, the water was calm, the tower unchanged. No boats, no wind, no visible disturbance. As I packed up, I noticed something I had missed before. On the exposed stone near the shoreline, just above the waterline, were grooves, parallel marks worn deep into the rock, as if something heavy had been dragged repeatedly toward the reservoir over many years. And that was when things began to take a darker turn. I returned at dawn, not because I expected answers in daylight, but because daylight removes excuses. Fear behaves differently when the sun is up. It becomes measurable, less theatrical, more honest. The fog had retreated to thin threads over the water, and the tower stood clearer than I had seen it yet. From this angle, I could see where the stone darkened permanently at the waterline, a stain that never dried. Below it, the submerged structure vanished into green-black depth. The grooves I had noticed the night before were still there. In daylight, they were worse. Too uniform to be natural erosion, too deliberate to be coincidence. They ran from the remnants of the old road straight toward the water, disappearing beneath the surface. I photographed them from multiple angles, using a measuring tape for scale. The spacing matched the width of a wooden cart axle. That detail bothered me more than the sounds. According to evacuation records, carts had been banned from the village weeks before the final departure. Everything movable was meant to be taken out. Yet these marks suggested repeated heavy movement toward the reservoir, not away from it. I reviewed testimonies from the last remaining residents, oral histories recorded decades later. Several mentioned the bells again, always in passing, always with hesitation. One account, given by a woman who had been a child at the time, described waking at night to hear ringing even after the ropes had been removed. Another described men going down to the church at night to check the tower, returning pale and silent, refusing to explain what they saw. No official report corroborates these claims. That absence is itself a pattern. By mid-morning, I heard voices. 2 hikers had approached from the upper trail, curious about the tower. I warned them to stay back, citing unstable ground. One asked if the bells really rang. I told him what was documented, not what I had heard. They left shortly after. The rule, never go alone, extends to never becoming someone else's excuse to break a boundary. In the afternoon, I received permission, formal this time, from the local authority to deploy a remotely operated camera near the submerged foundation. No diving, no retrieval. Live feed only. The operator met me at the shore. We launched the unit slowly, careful to avoid stirring sediment. As the camera descended, the water darkened, swallowing color and depth. Stone emerged from the murk. Arches, collapsed beams. The edge of a stairwell leading down into nothing. At 13 meters, the camera picked up movement. Not life, but water shifting through narrow spaces, pulsing as if inhaling. Sound came through next, distorted but present. A low resonance, not unlike what I had recorded from the shore. The operator adjusted filters, isolating frequencies. The pattern appeared again. 3 pulses, evenly spaced. Then the camera drifted past an opening where the bell chamber should have been. The bells were still there. That should not have been possible. Metal corrodes. Supports fail. Salvage attempts would have targeted them first. Yet there they hung, dark, encrusted, suspended at a slight angle, as if frozen mid-swing. The clappers were intact. No ropes attached. Nothing moved, and yet the sound continued. The operator went quiet. He adjusted the camera again, zooming in on the nearest bell. Its surface was pitted, uneven, but along the rim were bright streaks where metal had been worn clean, as if rubbed repeatedly. From the inside. The feed cut out moments later. No mechanical failure reported. Signal interference unexplained. That night I stayed farther back from the shore, maintaining a clear line of retreat. The bells rang again shortly after midnight. This time 5 tolls, slower, heavier. The intervals had changed. Patterns evolve when something is aware of being observed. That is not a scientific principle. It is a survival one. I reviewed the final parish log one more time. A marginal note, nearly illegible, referenced a local belief that bells do not only call people to worship, they mark time, warn of death, and in some traditions, guide the lost. Submerging them without ceremony was considered dangerous. The note ended with a sentence that had been crossed out. What is called must be answered. The reservoir responded that night, not with sound alone, but movement. The water level along the old road dropped noticeably within minutes, exposing more stone than charts predicted. Alarms from the dam later confirmed a brief, unexplained fluctuation. Engineers would call it pressure equalization. I watched as the newly exposed ground revealed more grooves, dozens of them, leading from the village ruins toward the tower. I packed my equipment and left before dawn. Rules obeyed, nothing taken, evidence secured. As I drove away, the last sound reached me, not through air or water, but through vibration felt in the steering wheel, a single deep toll, too strong to be distant. What happened next did not come from the reservoir at all. The call came the following afternoon, while I was still cataloging audio files and annotating timestamps. It was from the Regional Dam Authority, formal, cautious, and clearly rehearsed. They wanted to know exactly what I had recorded and when. Not because of the bells, because of what happened after I left. At 05:42 that morning, sensors embedded along the reservoir's retaining wall registered a synchronized vibration. Not a tremor, not mechanical stress, a resonance, low frequency, rhythmic, and brief. 3 pulses. The same spacing I had logged the first night. Automated systems flagged it as an anomaly and then dismissed it. Human operators did not. They told me this without accusation, but with an undertone I recognized well. Institutions do not like unanswered questions. They prefer explanations that fit inside reports. I gave them my data exactly as recorded. Nothing more, nothing less. The 4 rules apply even after you leave the site. That evening, news reached me through local channels. An elderly man had been found standing at the reservoir's edge before dawn, barefoot, soaked to the knees, disoriented. He lived kilometers away. His family said he had been asleep when he left the house. When questioned, he repeated only one sentence. "They rang early today." Medical staff attributed it to confusion brought on by dehydration and age. No mention was made of bells. I returned one final time, not to the shoreline, but to the village archives kept in a nearby town hall. In a box mislabeled as tax records, I found correspondence between the parish and regional officials during the evacuation. One letter stood apart. It warned against leaving the tower intact. It referenced older customs, ritual silencing, consecration, removal of the clappers. The response was blunt: budget constraints, time pressure, minimal risk. Minimal risk is not the same as no risk. The last documented action taken before flooding began was the removal of the bell ropes. The bells themselves were never stilled, never lowered, never closed off. Suspended between water and air, they were left in a condition neither functional nor inert. Not ringing, but not silent either. When I stood above the reservoir that final evening, the tower was quieter than I had ever seen it. No fog, no sound. The waterline had risen again, covering the newly exposed grooves as if they had never existed. I did not deploy equipment. I did not record. I only listened. Just before leaving, I felt it, subtle but unmistakable. A pressure change in the air, followed by a vibration underfoot, traveling up through bone rather than sound. One toll, singular, final, not loud enough to hear but strong enough to feel. Since then, reports have continued sporadically. Fishermen pausing mid-cast. Campers waking at night convinced they missed church. Hydrophone data showing rhythmic anomalies that vanish under review. Nothing conclusive, nothing actionable. Reservoirs are meant to bury the past efficiently. Stone, wood, memory. But some structures were never meant to be submerged without consequence. Bells, in particular, are designed to travel. Through air, through water, through time, I have not returned. Not because I am afraid, but because some places are not asking to be understood. They are asking to be acknowledged. The rules exist for a reason, and survival sometimes means knowing when observation becomes invitation. There are other locations, other waters, other structures left behind with unfinished purpose, and somewhere, beneath a surface that looks calm enough to trust, something is still counting time. If you've listened this far, take a moment to notice the quiet around you. The absence of sound has weight. In places like that reservoir, silence is never empty. It is held in suspension, waiting for the right conditions to break. Stories like this persist not because they are dramatic, but because they repeat. Different countries, different languages, the same patterns. Villages flooded, churches left behind, bells unheard but never truly silent. Engineers explain the mechanics. Historians record the dates. But the human response, the listening, the unease, the pull toward the water, remains consistent. Exploring places like these requires restraint more than courage. Permission matters. Preparation matters. Going alone is never just about company. It is about keeping perspective. And taking nothing but photos is not a rule of politeness. It is an acknowledgement that some things do not want to be carried away. The reservoir still fills and drains with the seasons. The tower still stands. And on certain nights, when the water is low and the air is heavy, people still stop what they're doing and listen, without knowing why. If you find yourself near a place like that, listen carefully. Not for the sound itself, but for what it asks of you. Curiosity is natural. Obedience to boundaries is survival. I hope wherever you are listening from tonight, you are safe, warm, and far from water that remembers what it covered. There will be more places like this, more stories that refuse to stay buried. When you're ready, I'll take you to the next one. Until then, take care of yourself. And if these stories speak to you, consider staying with me, quietly. There's always more to uncover.